Hello and welcome to Joefer Talks with Interesting People. I'm your host, Joefer, and now is the time to sit back, relax, and talk about something interesting. Hello, everyone. I'm Joefer, and today our in-studio guest is author Joseph L. Ferguson, who's here to talk about his new book, 35 Letters, Letters from a Mother to Her Son. Welcome, Joseph.
Hello, thank you.
So, a couple people have told me about your book and recommended I read it and have you on as a guest.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
I read your book and I found it very moving.
That's great.
It's presented in a way that most books aren't, and that it's a collection of letters.
Yes,
Can you tell us why you selected this method to tell the story?
sure. It's like this. I was sitting in a coffee house and I had my notebook out. I was thinking about what to write. I saw a couple ladies come in, got their coffee. They were sitting at the window just chatting. And it just kind of reminded me of women I've known in the past and how they talk to their kids. Although they weren't Southern, these ladies in the window, the way they phrased things struck me that way. Something broke free and bam, the character of Mildred was born.
And the story?
Oh, well, I was sitting there writing and thinking, who is she writing to? The story was going to start with a letter and then bleed into an actual book told in the third person. But as I was writing, I was voicing this character, Mildred, in my mind, and she's relaying a lot of information in her writing. I mean, it's gossipy, it's scandalous, it's heartfelt, it's guilt ridden. And after the first letter, I thought, it might be a neat idea to just create the entire book from letters.
Yes, I can see that. I'm just thinking back to the letters that I've received over the years. You do get a lot of information that you might not with just a phone call, or maybe it's the same information, but in a letter you read it sometimes more than once and the information just sinks in.
Oh, well, that's right. That's right. Repetition is key. Also, you can read a letter or two, set the book aside, and come back to it later, just like you might with a regular letter, and you'll still remember what was said.
So, without giving away the entire story, can you give us a brief synopsis?
Oh, absolutely. 35 Letters is a story about a mother whose son has left home. Her name is Mildred. The son, his name is Gordon. They haven't spoken in 3 years. This is their story. Ba-dum-bum-bum. This is where the foreboding music would come in. Mildred misses her son desperately, as they were once very close. She has 3 kids, and Gordon is the oldest. He's the one that she could speak to like an adult. They spent a lot of time together. I mean, working with her flowers, dancing to the radio, and just talking. Mildred's husband, Buck, he worked a lot and wasn't much for conversation, and her friend time was limited to the beauty salon and church. Gordon leaving left a big hole in her life. The letters are her way of continuing her relationship with Gordon.
So, it's safe to say that the son in the book, Gordon, is gay?
Yes, you can say that.
I didn't want to just out him as it's implied early on, but you don't really hear him referred to as a homosexual until several letters in. I also would like to add that this book is fictional, yes?
Giving Gordon a label doesn't really come up until the later letters. Yes, it's fictional, absolutely fictional.
Is the story based on your own life?
No, not really. The story is pure fiction, but it's inspired by things I've heard or encounters I've had growing up. The racial and religious slurs come from hearing them when my father would be talking to the neighbors or when he would just be going off about something. My dad was pretty much racially insensitive. That's a polite way of saying it. The gay remarks were things that I've been hearing since grade school. I mean, anyone who's the other was called all sorts of names. Let's just leave it there. Now, politically, references in the book relate to real events. I experienced those from watching the news and seeing it in the paper.
Have you known people with similar stories?
Not the exact stories. I've known guys who were told to leave home if they continued to be gay, but nothing to the extreme that Gordon went through. However, I have watched RuPaul's Drag Race, and every season there's a queen or two that were thrown out of their homes because they were gay.
How would you classify this book? It's not a memoir or a diary, but it kind of reads like one.
I would say literary fiction. I couldn't really find a category that it fit in the online book sites. I actually took the book to my local library and talked to the woman at the reference desk. She didn't have a set genre either. She thought the memoirs or diaries were the closest, but not an exact fit.
Literary fiction. I don't think I've heard that term used very often.
I hadn't heard of it until I began researching a genre. The term refers to market novels that do not fit neatly into an established genre.
When you were writing this book, what moved you to make Mildred, the mother character, a conservative Christian?
Well, the setting is a small West Texas town in the 1970s. I figured that most of the people there, whether practicing or not, would have some type of religion. Making her a conservative would play better with the way she tries to guilt Gordon into doing what she wants.
Is Mildred depressed?
By today's standards, I would say yes. She'd probably be on some type of medication. But back then, no. She was a wife and mother, trying to live up to the expectations that that title brings.
So she's just a product of the times.
Yep.
I'm thinking back to the 60s and 70s and the impressions women made in my life. Their lives did seem to revolve around their kids a lot and then doing whatever they could to keep their husbands happy, or at least keep the husbands from flying off the handle.
Yep.
After reading this, I feel sorry for Mildred. She could have been a very happy person and very different in life if she had been born 20 years later. Her son Gordon gets to experience life when major social changes are taking place in the 70s, while she just kind of stops and ferments in the place that she's at. We see her doing things that made me think that she might finally break free, like at the coffee house, but then she doesn't. She just goes back to the same life she's used to having.
Yes, that was intentional. She was born and raised a certain way that told her what she could and couldn't do as a woman. She is trapped by societal conventions.
Well, I thought that after finding out the coffee house wasn't what she expected, that she might change her views on a few things. She didn't.
No, she did not. When you hear the same thing day in and day out, that's what you come to believe.
The story also hints at racism, but isn't overly specific. Why did you limit this subject?
I didn't dwell on it too much because I didn't think I needed to. It's pretty accepted that racism is alive and well today, probably as much as back then, but a little under wraps. I thought going too deep in that area would take the focus off Mildred and put more on society as a whole. If you watch what's happening in the news now, there's a new zeal for racism. You might say that the racists are coming out of the closet.
Yeah, it's pretty sad that that's happening. When her husband refers to a song as colored music, she defends it as being American music. So she does this, but then elsewhere in the book, she still doesn't seem to see people of color as equal, and that seems to be a double standard. Am I seeing this correctly?
Yes, she does have a double standard when it comes to many things. Race is just one of them. She's also against those not of her faith, prostitutes, homosexuals, hippies, the down and out, and many other categories. In that way, she's a lot like some of the politicians in Congress that we see on the news almost daily.
I remember when I was young, when you think about being exposed to new people, I grew up pretty sheltered. At one point, I was living in northern Idaho, the second and third grade, and everyone was pretty much the same. They were working class, poor, religious, and very white. The exception being a couple of adult Native Americans in town, and then whatever I would see on TV.
I think that's because you lived in northern Idaho. I imagine it's still pretty white.
To me, Mildred comes across as very passive aggressive. Was that an intentional choice?
Yes,
Why?
I wanted her persona to be all over the place. A woman with a broken psyche, just trying to keep herself and her family on course.
I get that when someone says they love you and then condemn you for not going to church or for not playing nice with their father, that they can not want to talk. But Gordon hasn't spoken to his family in a long time. Do you think that's realistic?
Yes, I do. I know people who haven't spoken to their families in years. For all we know, Gordon did try to communicate with his family. We're only getting Mildred's side of the story.
So there's a sequel to 35 Letters?
Not exactly. I've outlined a book where Gordon is the main character, but I wouldn't call it a sequel.
Do you have a timeline for that?
Yes, in the future. When I don't know. These things take time, and I have a lot of projects in the works right now.
Okay, so let's get to some of the real life things in the book historically. Mildred says a couple of things that I found amusing. Her attraction to Liberace is one, and another was her support for Richard Nixon.
Well, I wrote about her liking Liberace because I thought it was telling. Liberace was obviously gay to anyone who looked at him with an open mind. Like so many other things in her life, Mildred only sees what she wants to see. She only hears what she wants to hear. She's perpetually wearing rose colored glasses that make things fit into her own personal set of beliefs.
When Gordon had his fight or his argument with his father, how much should the reader read into this? Was there physical abuse not mentioned? And what about sexual abuse?
The 35 letters never really gets to what started the argument or everything that was said, as well as the ultimatum that Buck gave to Gordon. As far as physical abuse, we just don't know. Growing up in that era, I can tell you that many parents physically struck their kids, whether it was a form of punishment or just because the parent was mad. It happened a lot. As far as sex abuse, it's also unknown. At one point, Mildred asks if Gordon had been touched or harmed by a homosexual when he was growing up. Since we don't get Gordon's response, we don't know. Also, if you think about it, Gordon's dad, Buck, is very homophobic. And you know what they say, the more homophobic a person is, the more they are trying to hide something.
In one of the letters, there's a mention of Gordon being caught with another boy when he was younger. Mildred seems to just gloss right over this, like what happened didn't happen. Can you discuss this?
Sure, it's like I said before, she only sees what fits into her beliefs. She makes up a story about smoking because she can't fathom what she actually saw, catching her son in the act of something that she's totally against.
Well, I think she seemed pretty open minded when it came to Christine Jorgensen. That was a bit of a surprise to me.
Yeah, it is a little bit. In researching Miss Jorgensen, I found that many news outlets and people that were interviewed saw her as an oddity, but when she began dating men, no one referred to her as homosexual. It was like they got over the shock that she transitioned and now she was just a celebrity.
Yes, but she didn't denounce her like I thought she would, especially in front of her friends at the beauty parlor.
No, she didn't. She didn't because the other woman was trying to embarrass her by implying that Gordon knew her. Mildred is a tough lady, and she wasn't going to give her rival the satisfaction of letting her see that she was all riled up.
That's the same beauty shop with the gay hairdresser, right?
Yes, Fernando.
So she doesn't think the hairdresser is married because there aren't any single Latin women in town. Was culturally mixing that forbidden in the early 1970s?
I think it might have been. Remember the TV show The Jeffersons? It took place in New York City, but it was still considered a shock that there was a fictional mixed race couple on the show. And this was being shown on national TV. Mildred's story takes place in a small southern town, years behind what was taking place in New York or Hollywood.
Let's see now. Mildred talks about so much in this book.
Yes,
She seems to cover every subject.
she does. In a way, she's more worldly than we give her credit for.
Right. The letters do span over several years. Now, there's a death in the book that Mildred doesn't dismiss, but she also doesn't fault the spouse of the person that dies. If that situation were to happen today, I don't think anyone would be coming to the husband's defense. Women really were treated poorly in Mildred's world.
Yes, they were. Things are better for women as a whole today, but there's still a long way to go. A lot of women are still treated as property. I mean, even today.
Mildred also brings up other religions in her letters. One she mentions more than once is Judaism. And boy, she doesn't think highly of it, does she?
No, she doesn't. Religion is the hill she'll die on. She has no qualms about walking over others' beliefs.
Yeah, she blames the problems of the world on the Jewish race, but she uses a slang term instead.
I heard that term a lot growing up. Every adult around me used it, along with a lot of other words that weren't so nice.
Another thing I found interesting was what she considered scandalous, like being divorced or getting pregnant out of wedlock.
That's the way it was. In some places and families, it's still that way.
You know, almost everything she brings up in her letters, the cultural and the political things, they're all very relevant today. The same things are happening now. It's like history's repeating itself.
Unfortunately, yes.
When you wrote this book, how did you know drag queens were going to be villainized like they are today?
I didn't really. In my world, drag is everywhere. It's on TV, in nightclubs, in bars, it's on morning television. It's only recently that a certain segment of politicians have been attacking them so openly. I think it's just a diversion tactic, another way to demonize the other and strike fear in people, just like they've done and continue to do with the LGBTQIA community.
And trans issues? They're also in the book and at the top of the news today. It's kind of like you're psychic.
Just call me Karnak the Magnificent. That was a 1970s reference.
Most stories wrap things up and there's a conventional ending to the story. I didn't find your story ending in a very conventional way. It was surprising.
Yes, it was blunt.
Yes, blunt's a good word. It gives your book just that more of a punch.
Thank you.
Before we go, can you tell us about any other books in your future?
Right now, there's only one partially written and two that are outlined. One centers on Gordon and the other one on Rachel. I don't have a time frame for their completion.
So Gordon gets to tell his side of the story?
I'm not saying.
And there's a book about Rachel too? Oh, I don't think we've mentioned Rachel today. She's Gordon's little sister. There's quite a bit about her in the letters Mildred writes.
Yes, but it's set about 25 years in the future. It's in the 90s.
I'd like to thank you, Joseph, for coming into the studio today and sharing the behind-the-scenes thoughts and ideas that brought about this exceptional book.
And thank you for having me. It was fun.
I encourage everyone listening, if you haven't read 35 Letters from a Mother to Her Son, read it. It's a moving story and gets you thinking. If you're over 40, you'll probably relate to or have memories about a lot of what was written about. And if you're under 40, it shows you what life was like in the good old 1970s. So, Joseph, where can our listeners experience 35 Letters?
It's available on Amazon in ebook, paperback, hardback, and audio format, or you can get the audiobook through audible.com. It's voiced by a wonderful voiceover actress named Stacy Smith. So check it out, and please feel free to leave a review.
Thanks again for talking with me today. I'll put links to the book in the notes for this podcast. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye, y'all.
Joefer Talks to Interesting People is produced through JoeferArts Productions. All rights reserved. Copyright 2023.